So you wake up this morning, all kinds of news, and then there's this about Trump and Netanyahu from an individual by the name of Barak Ravid. Now, Barak Ravid writes for Axios, but he's actually a journalist in Israel. He's sort of the Acosta of Israel. He's a big mouth. He's a leftist. He and I have gone at it a little bit here and there. But he's an activist. He's an activist. And he's got a new book out, the name of which I'll let you find out on your own. And somehow he is invited or asks and it's accepted to interview our president, President Trump, I believe over the summer. I'm just thinking to myself, who would advise President Trump to sit down with this guy who despises him and despises Netanyahu? Who would advise him to do such a thing? Obviously, somebody who wants to create a problem for President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And so he's trying to sell books, which is what most journalists do. He said, in the interview from my book, Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords, and the Reshaping of the Middle East, Trump fumed over a video Netanyahu sent congratulating Biden for his victory. Quote, says Trump, I haven't spoken to him since. F him. F him. F Netanyahu, because apparently President Trump has been informed, or was informed, that Benjamin Netanyahu was one of the first people to congratulate Joe Biden on the election. Now, you and I know that's not true. At the time we discussed this, he wasn't among the first to congratulate Joe Biden. In fact, he waited. He waited at least half a day. So I went back and looked. November 8, 2020. After hours of silence, Netanyahu congratulates Biden, but doesn't say what for. So Netanyahu's under attack by American and Israeli media, and he's the last Western leader to congratulate Biden. Then we have this from the Jerusalem Post. Yaakov Katz, who is another Biden hater. Why hasn't Benjamin Netanyahu called Joe Biden? That was November 12th. Then we have this from U.S. News and Reuters, I should say. Netanyahu belatedly joins world leaders congratulating Joe Biden. Then we have this from Axios itself. Axios itself. The very same Barak Ravid. Netanyahu joins other leaders in congratulating Biden for beating Trump. And he wonders in the piece, he writes, more than 12 hours after the U.S. television networks called the presidential race for Joe Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu tweeted his congratulations to the president-elect. So the very guy who interviews Trump this summer, the leftist, who hates Netanyahu, he's an Israeli, but he writes for Axios, which is a left-wing site in the United States, interviews President Trump, I think again this summer, and brings up this issue in a way, in an indirect way. So he was criticizing Netanyahu more than a year ago for waiting 12 hours, more than every other Western leader. And here, he doesn't tell President Trump, well, Netanyahu waited 12 hours. And in fact, I was one of the ones who criticized him. You get my point, Mr. Producer? And so in this piece, from November 8, 2020, Netanyahu joins other leaders in congratulating Biden for beating Trump. More than 12 hours, I told you what he said. Israel's one of the main allies of the U.S., but Netanyahu's congratulatory tweet came long after most leaders around the world had already congratulated Biden. So what's he saying? Joe, we've had a long and warm personal relationship for nearly 40 years, and I know you as a great friend. I look forward to working with both of you to further strengthen the special alliance between the U.S. and Israel. Now, what else? Immediately after he tweets out to Joe Biden a congratulations, for which he is said to be late in the United States and the Israeli press, over a half a day late. Why? Why is he waiting? What's going on? What's with Netanyahu? Meaning he's too close to Trump. He immediately tweets out, right after he tweets out to Biden, appreciation to President Trump. Now, the only reason I can think, and I haven't talked to President Trump about this, I'd like to, the only reason I can think that President Trump would have reacted the way he did is that people around him are lying about Netanyahu. If people around him in November, either with his campaign or on his staff at a relatively high level, were telling President Trump at the time, look at this Netanyahu. People who don't like Netanyahu. Look how he's coddling to Biden. Look how fast out of the box he came. One of the earliest, one of the first to acknowledge Biden, when in fact he was one of the last. That's the public record. I just read it to you. They're trashing Netanyahu because he belatedly joins other world leaders or he's late. What's he waiting for? Why was he silent so long? And I'm just telling you what they're saying. And so the only thing I can think of is that somebody or some bodies told President Trump that somehow Netanyahu was the first or one of the earliest ones out of the box and was probably telling him that he was gleeful about a Biden quote-unquote victory. It's all false. It's not true. Israel's PM waited 12 hours to congratulate, I'm reading, the victors and thank Trump for taking U.S.-Israel ties to unprecedented heights as Israeli lawmakers across the political spectrum expressed their well wishes. And he was late, Netanyahu, they say. Waited 12 hours before congratulating. And the man who wrote this book and wanted to create hype is the guy, this would be the equivalent of letting Bob Woodward into Mar-a-Lago this summer to interview the president. Because that means somebody suggested to President Trump that he should sit down for an interview with this guy. With this Barak Ravid. And here's the dirty little secret. Everybody knows Barak Ravid is the recipient of leaks, both in the United States and in Israel, of people who were trying to undermine Netanyahu, even people in our own government. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. I've done a little work on this today. And everybody knows or thinks they know which individual or individuals are behind this. So I would take this with a grain of salt. Obviously, a lot of you who are fans of both men, as am I, were rather shocked by this. And I've kind of broken it down for you, took a close look, pulled up what exactly did Netanyahu do, and what exactly did he say? Because I thought when we discussed it a year or more ago, I pointed out that he was taking heat because he was basically sitting on his hands and waiting. That's exactly what occurred with Netanyahu. So what about all those foreign leaders before Netanyahu who congratulated Joe Biden? They didn't get an FU because somebody was spinning propaganda, I believe, to President Trump. And this guy, Barak Ravid, was more than happy to take advantage of it. In other words, a setup. A setup. I think I know the individual or individuals who were involved based on what I was digging out information today in Israel and the United States. Barak Ravid knows what he did. And so let me suggest this. Let me get the name of his book. I will mention it, and then I will encourage you not to purchase it. Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords, and the Reshaping of the Middle East. Don't let that relatively benign or even positive title mislead you. If you're interested in this subject, do not read it through the eyes and the words of a modern-day Bob Woodward. Because this guy's a creep. An absolute creep. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.